of Social Impact Live. Thank you for joining me for the sixth and final session in our series, Lessons on Social Impact from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This is a series where I've been going over his 6 principles of nonviolent resistance and talking about what we can learn today in our quest to create social change from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., from his life, from his legacy, and from his principle, his philosophy of nonviolent resistance. So on this final session, I just want to dive into his final point, his 6th pillar of nonviolence. But I want to start off by recapping the first 5 so that we are able to have in our minds the entire range of principles. So the first principle of nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people. It is active, nonviolent resistance to evil. And I talked about how it is a courageous act to be nonviolent, and that there are many ways to express that, both through our words, through our actions, through our spirit. The next second principle is nonviolence seeks to win friendship and understanding. The end result of nonviolence is redemption and reconciliation. And this was the idea that we are seeking the long-term goal of unity, the long-term goal of being in communion with one another, and that requires understanding, and that the tool we can use to get there is empathy. The third principle of nonviolence is that nonviolence seeks to defeat injustice, not people. Nonviolence recognizes that evildoers are also victims. And this is a focus, again, building on this concept that we are seeking to be in community with one another. Injustice is something that harms everyone. As Dr. King is famous for saying, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And this was the point that in injustice, those who commit wrongs are not the ones that we seek to topple, overthrow, or make look bad necessarily. It is the injustice itself that we target. It is the hate itself that we target. And we also work to build systems to actually overcome those things. The final point on that one was also about the fact that those who hurt people have often been hurt in some shape or form. And what we're looking for is to be in community where we can stop harming one another overall. The fourth principle is that nonviolence holds that suffering can educate and transform. And this was a point around the impact that suffering can have on transforming the heart and the mind of other people when communicated to those people in a way where they're able to digest what that suffering means and their role in it. The fifth principle of nonviolence is that nonviolence chooses love instead of hate, that nonviolence resists violence of spirit as well as body, as I mentioned before. And I talked about these different types of love, this concept of agape, and this goal of really focusing in on building a loving world and a loving society with one another as well. And then the 6th principle of nonviolent resistance, which I'm going to go into here today, is this. Nonviolence believes that the universe is on the side of justice. The nonviolent resistor has deep faith that justice will eventually win, right? And I think that this is an incredibly powerful frame, this 6th point here. And what I want to do, like I've done on many of the other ones, is I want to read to you from Martin Luther King's book, Stride Toward Freedom. And I just want to read to you a little bit about this 6th principle so that you understand it fully, and that you can also pull directly from Dr. Martin Luther King's words on this. So here I go. A 6th basic fact about nonviolent resistance is that it is based on the conviction that the universe is on the side of justice. Consequently, the believer in nonviolence has deep faith in the future. This faith is another reason why the nonviolent resistor can accept suffering without retaliation, for he knows that in his struggle for justice, he has cosmic companionship. It is true that there are devout believers in nonviolence who find it difficult to believe in a personal God, but even these persons believe in the existence of some creative force that works for universal wholeness. Whether we call it an unconscious process, an impersonal Brahman, or a personal being of matchless power and infinite love, there is a creative force in this universe that works to bring the disconnected aspects of reality into harmonious whole. So that is the 6th tenet of nonviolent resistance directly from Dr. King. And for me, it is ultimately a powerful reminder that even when things are dark, we must have faith that light will win out. Uh, I think about this concept a lot when I look at history, when I look at the present, when I look at my own life, actually. And so maybe this will be something that you can relate to as well. We often feel like the moment that we're going through is the most real, the most powerful, maybe the most painful. Sometimes it can feel like pain will never end. We wonder what it's all for, what's the purpose of it, what's the meaning behind it. And it is in those moments when I feel that way that I try to zoom out on my own life a little bit. I try to zoom out and I try to look at history. I try to see what are the patterns that we have from history. What are the examples that I can find of times where that hasn't been true? Because the reality to me is that almost everything that we experience, almost every emotion, almost every experience itself, almost every moment of happiness, joy, and pain is fleeting. It is transient in some way. And history and zooming out is something that can show me that reality. So I think about my grandmother, for example, my great-grandmother. My great-grandmother, I'm blessed to have a great-grandmother who is still alive at 108 years old. And she is a wealth of knowledge, but you know, even more importantly, she is a beautiful and incredible woman who shares her gifts with her family and with the world, and has been doing so for 108 years. But I think about her life, and I think about my life, and I think about where I am right now versus where she started, and versus where her grandmother started. Right. So my grandmother was born, my great-grandmother, sorry, was born in 1912, the year that the Titanic sank. The year the Titanic sank, she was born. She was born in a house without electricity in South Carolina, where they used candles, right, or little lamps, basically lanterns, in order to light up the room whenever they had the money for that. She lived her life in Pennsylvania. She moved to Pennsylvania. She moved through the world. She became a nurse. She led a number of different organizations within the city itself. And she continued to live a life where she was able to buy a home, live in that home now for generations, raise a family, raise kids in that home, but go from being a little Black girl who grew up in South Carolina, in a rural area without electricity, to video chatting with me and her now great grandchild via an iPad style device in the year 2021. I think it's incredible that she witnessed the birth of radio, really. I mean, she witnessed the birth of television. She witnessed the creation of the internet. She witnessed the civil rights era. She witnessed the Great Depression. She witnessed both world wars. She witnessed the first pandemic the one that we've been talking about, the one in 1918 and 1919. She was there. She was 6 years old. She said that they had to wear masks during that time as well and stay apart from each other so that everyone wouldn't die. So these points, they give me some perspective on life. But I also think about the fact that her mother was a housekeeper, a house cleaner, but her grandmother was a slave. My great-grandmother, who is still alive today, her grandmother was a slave. She was part of the tail end of 246 years of slavery, of chattel slavery for Black people in America. That is an incredible direct link, right, to someone who is alive today, right? Someone who I get to talk to today, who knows of family members who lived through what is arguably the worst time period, especially for Black people in America. The contrast between her grandmother being a slave, buying a web, being sold on a block, and being reunited with her mother years later. These are story fragments that we've collected through newspaper clippings and other stories that we've managed to put together. The contrast between her grandmother, my great grandmother's grandmother, being a slave, to my grandmother growing up and being born when she was born, living through a pandemic, the Depression, World War I, World War II, the Civil Rights era, uh, the birth of all of these technologies into today, right? And then for her to have grandchildren who grew up without a ton of money necessarily, from families that were challenged in a lot of ways, and some of the worst and most challenging ways that America, could challenge families at the time, to her having a great grandchild in myself who has grown up and managed to attain education from Stanford University for an undergrad and a master's degree, who's built his own family, who owns his own house, who has built his own business, actually now putting into action so many of the things that our family has learned about impacting the world and doing good to the best of my ability. I just think about how things do change, right? Life does change. Things have changed in so many ways. And I think it can be really challenging when we're zoomed in, when we're so close to pain and hardship, when we're close to despair, to feel like it will last forever. One of the things that to me is so important is that we as social impact innovators, we as social impact designers, people who are seeking to create a better world, that we can hold both of these realities at the same time, right? The reality is that I and you, perhaps, and those who are doing this work, can at times be close to those who are in pain. At the very least, feel empathy for those who are in pain, those who are struggling, those who are hurting because of the systems that mankind has created. So that is one side of it, is that we can feel that pain, we can feel the compassion and the direct result of being near and caring for people who have been through so much. But on the other side, right, we need to continue to hold on to this hope, this belief that things can actually get better, that things can change. And for me, it is that zooming in and zooming out through history that really helps me to do that. I think that if we can hold on to that in those moments of despair, I think that we as social innovators will be better off. We'll be better able to alter and change the world. And so I don't really have a long message for you today. I wanted to impart that piece of hope to you, though, that idea, which comes from Dr. King, right? The sixth tenet of nonviolent resistance, which is that things will move toward good, that the universe is on the side of justice, that nonviolent resistors have a deep faith that justice will win out. Hold on to that faith, maintain that faith and that belief, because as Dr. King often says, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. In that quote, he's referencing Theodore Parker, who's another minister and preacher who came before him. And I think it is just such a valuable thing for us all to remember. The last thing I'll say on this is that if we look at history, we see that sometimes the pain lasts longer than we do. Sometimes the fight that we are undertaking isn't completed in our own lifetimes. This is something that I have to hold on to and have to remember as I do this work. It is worth the fight. It is worth the work, right? To do good. If we are focused purely on the result, on the outcome, and on making sure that we achieve it in this lifetime, we begin to take on the responsibility of creating change around things that we can't necessarily control. But we can put our effort, our time, and energy into something that is good if we have hope that change will come. There are a number of people in history, and the two examples I'll give you right now are Moses, who while leading the Jews out of Egypt, did not make it to the promised land, died before they entered the promised land of Israel. There are a number of people who didn't make it there, Moses being one example. And then the second is actually Dr. King himself, who didn't get to see a number of laws, legislation, and other pieces of action that were the result of his work. He didn't get to see those actually manifest before he was killed. He didn't get to see the world that we live in right now. He didn't get to see both the beautiful successes and value that we've generated, as well as the challenges we still face. But he believed, as he stated in several of his sermons and several of his speeches, that he's been to the mountaintop and he knows that we will get there. And so I believe that we will get there as well. This has been an incredible series for me. I've really enjoyed talking with all of you and getting to dive in deeper to Dr. King's 6 Principles of Nonviolence. If this is useful for you, if you are interested in more tips, more tricks, more insights, more stories from social impact, more examples of how we can create change in the world, then please do like, follow, and subscribe. I go live every day, every weekday at 9 a.m., right around there. And then on the weekends, I go live as well. And you can either catch those live, they're not at a program time, or you can catch the replay. But if you subscribe or you follow along, you'll actually get a notification that I've gone live. So hopefully this was useful for you. I will be back tomorrow with another episode of Social Impact Live, and I really look forward to continuing to build a community with you where we can do good in the world, lasting and sustained good in the world that really benefits everyone. All right, I'll see you tomorrow.